Hey Internet, I am just about to make the challenge number one recipe. I have my chicken, which I spatchcocked. That's a fabulous word. And I'm not gonna, obviously I didn't record how to do that because, well, it's kind of gross. But if you really want to know, I'm sure if you Google spatchcock, it'll come back with a bunch of videos who tell you everything you need to know about it. The recipe calls for capon, and I don't happen to know whether this chicken is a little boy chicken or a little girl chicken. I expect it's probably a girl, but even if it was a boy, it wouldn't be a capon because a capon has to be essentially a gelded chicken. And I'm fairly certain modernly they don't spend the time doing that. So I'm relatively certain that this is a girl chicken. And in chatting about the recipe with some cooking folks I know, we talked about the instruction where it says to take a capon and roast him. And medievally, I'd expect that to be, roasting on a spit by the fire, but I have neither spit nor fire. So I'm going to fake it with a fairly warm oven. I've got it set to 450. And then I've got my chicken spatchcocked, which is a fabulous word. And I have it raised up off the bottom of the pan. And I'm going to cook this for 20 minutes in the oven. And hopefully that will be hot and right enough, or half enough. So I think 40 minutes would be closer to enough. But I'm going to go with 20 minutes. And then I have the rest of my ingredients en place. So I have some clean broth. Mine happens to be strictly chicken broth. I don't happen to have a pot of broth simmering over my fire that I keep tucking, all of the various vegetable matters and meat matters into it. So instead I have box broth, and we're going to go with that. And then the recipe calls for strong powder, which powder fort is another word for that. I happen to have this one. It is a bottle of powder fort that was given to me with this little slip of paper inside, and it tells me what it's made of, though I'm actually kind of bothered, but they just end it with etc. I'm like, etc. What? What does that mean? Did you put MSG into it? I don't know. Whoever made it, they also didn't sign it, so I can't thank them and let them know here it is 10 years later and I'm using the spice mixture that they gave as largesse. So whoever you are, thank you for making the spice mixture. I'm totally going to use it. Anyway, so it calls for strong powder and saffron. I actually haven't done cooking in a while, so if you look very carefully, you'll see that my saffron technically expired at 2005. Just going to kind of ignore that because somebody at some point presented me with a significant amount of saffron. So the amount of this saffron sort of exceeded my needs. I'm going to just use it even though it's expired. I'm sure it will be fine. The recipe calls for salt. I have table salt because that's what I have easily on hand. It calls for bread to thicken it. This is my very, very, very sad attempt at quarantine bread making. My bread was very, very dense. So I have leftovers, which is almost unheard of in my house. But I'm going to take this bread and I'm going to grate it up and use that to thicken our gravy. And then also it calls for iron, which have been seethed hard. And I'm reading that as hard-boiled eggs. And here we have a prime example of Easter eggs that we have now left over, and I haven't eaten them up. I've been very carefully not eating them, so I'd be sure to have some left over for the recipe. So that's my next steps, and I'll see you in 20 minutes or so. All right, Internet. The chicken has been in the oven for 20 minutes. And you can't hear it anymore, but it came out sizzling. It didn't get real brown. I kind of want to put it back in, but I don't think I'm going to. I'm going to leave it at the 20 minutes. I'm going to actually let it cool down because I don't want to pull it apart with my hands with it being so hot. So I'll come back once I have hewn it to gobbets. All right, Internet. I did hew him to gobbets and cast him in a pot. I am just about to cover him with clean broth and then seethe or boil him until he is tender. In looking at this and working on the chicken, I honestly think it should have been cooked more. I know it said half enough so that it's sort of half done, but I think probably 3/4 cooked would be much easier to pick the flesh off the chicken. I honestly, if we weren't in a quarantine I would probably consider making this with a rotisserie chicken or a smoked chicken, something with cooked chicken bits. Because honestly, the oven, as far as browning, it was all on the skin, and I decided I didn't want skin floating in my chicken and gravy, so no skin there. So any browning that happened kind of got left on the cutting board. Speaking of, on my cutting board, I have chicken bits. And these I'm going to actually bag up and put in the freezer. And the next time I make chicken broth, I will throw them in the pot. So there's a lot more meat on there than I would normally leave on a carcass, but it's, like I said, kind of raw-ish and hard to pick. So I think really the chicken should be cooked more, closer to say 3/4 done. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and throw clean broth on him and then boil him for, I don't know, I'm going to go for 10 minutes and then see if the chicken looks all cooked and then go from there. Okay, Internet. So I put about 2 cups of chicken broth in there. Forgot to mention that last time. And I boiled it for about 10, well, I had it on the stove for 10 minutes. It probably boiled less than that. And the chicken's looking pretty good to me. I did have a cover on. I've taken it off now, and it looks a little too boily to me, so I'm going to turn that down. I also took my other 2 cups of broth, because, luckily the boxes come with 4 cups, and I put that on my bread after I'd broken my bread into little pieces. Originally, I thought I would grate it, but that exceeded the amount of effort that I really wanted to put into that. So I have, let's see, the recipe says, take bread and the same broth, the self broth, and draw it up efer together. So then take strong powder and saffron and salt and cast thereto. And self broth, draw efer, take strong powder and saffron and salt and cast thereto. Take eggs and see them hard, take out the yolks, hew the whites. Take the pot from the fire and cast the whites therein. It actually never says to put the bread in there. And draw it up together. Take strong powder and saffron. Yeah, I'm going to assume they kind of skip that step because it doesn't actually say, hey, take this bread thing that you did and throw it in with the chicken. But that seems like a really good plan. I mean, I suppose I could serve my chicken over my bread, but I want it a little bit thicker. So I've got my bread and my broth, and I measured out a 1/4 teaspoon of salt, though that seems like a little much, and a 1/4 teaspoon of my powder fort, and a pinch of saffron, because that seems like a good amount, and my egg whites. This is the whites from my 3 eggs. It turns out that when I boiled my Easter eggs, I did them for 10 minutes, and since I'm practically at sea level, that looks like it's not enough. So next time I'll have to do them for, I don't know, 13 or something, but I'm going to call it good enough for now. So I'm going to take all of these things and do them into the pot, and then probably turn it down, because it's only 4:40 and I don't want to eat dinner until about 6. So I may have to reheat this. So whatever. So come back when I get it all combined together and serve it forth. All right, Internet. So I boiled this, I don't know, probably for 30 minutes, an hour. And it kind of has, it looks kind of like what I would expect from a chicken and dumplings. And the bread puffed up a lot like dumplings. I'm going to go ahead and dump the egg white in there and then serve it up and let it cool off and see what my family thinks. Alright, so there's what I have as far as a dish goes. I did forget in my mise en place to put the ground cloves nearby. I was very, very sparse with the cloves because it's super, super strong, and I don't want to overwhelm the dish with it. So here's what I have. We'll see how it tastes. All right, so the takeaway. The recipe called for roasting, and it said to roast it halfway. And in roasting it halfway, I thought originally it was for getting some browning, but when it came to making the dish, I really didn't want skin floating in my dish. And I don't know if that's a modern thing or if the medieval usage would have dropped the skin out as well. But since I dropped the skin out, any browning that we got from roasting was kind of lost. That said, also, as I mentioned in the videos, Roasting it half enough left it fairly raw, which made it hard to pick off of the carcass, which I think left a lot of meat on the carcass. It'll be good when I go to make broth, but not so great. I think I would have preferred it to be cooked all the way through. I have to wonder if they're cooked half enough is essentially cooked through but not dried out. I don't know what exactly that was there for. I don't know why that was one of the instructions. But personally, I would prefer it if the meat was entirely cooked when I went to clean it off the bones. So like I said, the browning, I pulled the skin off, so it didn't really add any flavor to the dish. The dish itself had a really nice chickeny flavor. It in the end, what I made really resembled chicken and dumplings. I did find, and I'll leave my redaction as what I made, but from that redaction, I would recommend adding more salt and more powder fort. The spice on the dish was really, really low. Honestly, all I could taste was the saffron, which is surprising since it's so far expired. And maybe a little bit of the cinnamon and obviously the cloves because that was on top. But there wasn't a lot of pepper coming through from the powder fort, so I think it needed a heavier dose of the powder fort. The dish itself was fairly easy. If you were looking for a normal chicken and dumplings, this would be a nice, easy way to get that. I personally, we ate it. The husband said it was okay. I thought it was okay, but needed a little heavier spice. The child liked the bread, but didn't like the chicken, which is kind of par for the course since he really doesn't like to eat meat. So I plan to use it later this week as filling for a pot pie because that's what happens to soups at my house. I don't know that I'll make it again. I do make a chicken and dumpling recipe fairly frequently. But when I make chicken and dumpling, I actually add curry powder into it. So it has a much higher flavor profile than what I was getting from this recipe, which honestly I could throw curry powder into this, but I'm not sure that curry powder and powder fort are really the same thing there. It was pretty good. It wasn't bad. And it's definitely edible, and we'll have it as pot pie later. So that's what we have for the first recipe. Thank you all, and I'll talk to you later.